Bienvenue, willkommen, bienvenido. Welcome to Almendra Podcast, Stories of Hope, Seeds of Change. I'm Bernard Lecuivre. I'm committed to making technology more human, ethical, and sustainable, at home and through courageous transformation. With Almendra Podcast, Merle Baker and I talk to people across Europe who make change possible through words, through action, storytelling, education, and innovation. My guest today is someone who's helping thousands of researchers and leaders to achieve impact with meaning. Mark Reed. You're a researcher, professor, author, and founder of Fast Track Impact. You're also a passionate advocate for making science slower, deeper, and more human. Welcome to Almendra, Mark. I'm truly happy to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks.
First of all, Mark, I have to say I really loved your 5 steps approach to achieve impact. That's how I started to follow your insights, so thanks again for that. And maybe before we get more deeply into your work, I want to start with a more personal question. Who are you and why do you do what you do?
Great. Thanks. I'm glad you enjoyed the 5 steps. That's part of my book, the Research Impact Handbook. And so 3rd edition of that is coming out soon and the 5 steps are still in it. So I've spent my career trying to make a difference through the research that I do. I did my PhD in the Kalahari Desert. I have done environmental research throughout my career in different habitats with different countries, people in mind that I'm trying to help with that. But very often the work that I do doesn't actually make a difference. And so I sought earlier in my career to understand why I was failing to make a difference. And increasingly, I started to try and generalize beyond my own experience to understand theoretically, what is it that actually works? Why do some ideas take off, spread like wildfire, change the world, while other equally credible ideas seem to go nowhere? Is it something we're doing? Is there something, therefore, that we could do to enable our research to make more of a difference? I turned that into the Research Impact Handbook, into a training course, and launched Fast Track Impact from that to train researchers around the world in how they can use the knowledge they are generating to achieve more good.
Interesting, of course. And maybe if you want to start from the basic and not teasing too much of your lessons and course, of course, with your sense, how would you define impact?
Yeah, I used that word good before on purpose because for me, impact is a value judgment. What I perceive as good, you may perceive as really bad. You look at most policy impacts and they will divide the crowd. Some people will love it, some people will hate it and vote against that government the next time they get a chance. And so in the papers that I've written about impact, I've tried to argue that this is far more subjective than many of us would like it to be. We need to understand who we seek to serve, and then ask those people from their perspective what will be good for them. And we also need to look at those other people for whom this might not be so good. In fact, for whom this may even be damaging or harmful, and start thinking about how we might mitigate the negative impacts of what we do. So I simply describe impact as the good that we as researchers do in the world.
Well, that's very interesting. Then you link really the impact with ethics?
Indeed, my most recent paper, in fact, is on the ethics of engagement and impact, which I think is something that we tend not to think about. Most universities around the world have research ethics committees, but those ethics committees will not touch engagement and impact. They're out of scope. And even if they are asked to do that and agree, they don't have the expertise, the skills, the training to be able to identify those challenges. And so principally the 2 key issues here are people who are engaging unwisely, especially if you're working with perhaps more marginalized or vulnerable groups, and you haven't taken the right advice, you don't have the right training, potentially you go in like a bull in a china shop and create more harm than good by engaging poorly. But the other issue is negative unintended consequences. I might be trying to achieve good with one group in mind, when in fact I achieve that good, but at the expense of another group. Or there's just some really nasty side effect or some other unintentional ill that comes from that work, that had I done the work ahead of time, I might have been able to predict, and I might therefore have been able to mitigate.
And on this, when trying to do good, how do you, or where do you draw the line between here the influence that we want to do and the imposition of this positive impact that or the good we want to have?
Ultimately, I argue that impact is in the eye of the beholder. That ultimately we can only define what is good in relation to different groups within society. And so we need to think deeply, we need to think broadly about everyone who might benefit and everyone who might be impacted negatively. And that means we also need to think about future generations and potentially non-human species as well. And that's not necessarily an easy task. But if we can take a radically inclusive approach to thinking about who might be relevant, then we are much more likely to get this right and get that balance between good and bad, so that on balance we are generating more good than bad.
Oh, yeah. I like the ethics principle here and the radical inclusive approach. Now, on the how specifically, what could be your vision or tips and tricks to be able to deploy it with positive impact?
Yeah, so the traditional approach is to use something known as a stakeholder analysis. I tend not to use the word stakeholder now. I've written a paper recently on the colonial roots of this word, and in a broader attempt to decolonize language in the academy, I'm trying to avoid that where I can. And so we now have an adapted version of the traditional approach, which I call a 3I analysis, which helps you to think systematically about who might be relevant in relation to 3 criteria, each of which begin with the letter I. In a traditional stakeholder analysis, you would look at those who have influence and those who have interest, crowding out, eliminating those people who do not have sufficient influence or interest, because time is short, resources are limited, and you have to focus. The problem, however, is that very often there are groups who are highly impacted, the third of the 3 I's, who may have very little interest, at least in the way in which you are currently framing your work, and by definition may have no influence whatsoever. These are the poor, the marginalized, and the oppressed. They may be impacted more positively than anyone else. They could be more impacted negatively, but it is your job to make sure that you do not crowd those groups out, that you include them as well. And so by looking across the influence, the interest, and the impact that your work could have across multiple groups, you are now able to prioritize those who are most important for you to engage with, recognizing still that you have limited time and resources, but you are now prioritizing in a way which is much more inclusive.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm. We talk about pace, about rhythm, about limited time and resources, about the need to take time to think, to reflect. And yet, in front of some challenges that we face in our world, in our environment, we have to cope with some sense of urgency. How would you reconcile this sense of urgency and taking some time for critical thinking?
Yeah, so I always caution slowness when it comes to impact. Really, how urgent is this? And very few opportunities for impact are that urgent that I have no time to talk to anyone, and I just go straight in there. So I would always ask myself, can I make time to talk to more people before I rush into this opportunity? And this 3I approach, as I'm describing it, does then help me to systematically think about who I need to prioritize, and that could just be 3 or 4 conversations that I have now as a minimum. That now enable me to think about this issue from a much broader perspective. And I think that the key challenge is in terms of policy. So some of the opportunities that we may be given as researchers are very time sensitive. I'm called to give evidence. There's some kind of deadline that means that I need to rush that evidence into some kind of policy process. But without stopping and thinking, what often happens is that policy elites have framed the policy problem in relation to their values, whether they're political values or just implicit biases that those people have about how the world is. And so you inadvertently play into those political games, helping answer the problem as it has been framed. When had you actually gone and spoken to some of the people who are affected by this issue, they may well have told you that the problem is somewhere else. Whilst everyone points the finger at this group, for example, as being the problem, in fact, there are deeper causes for this. That means that the questions that your policy colleagues are asking in a rush are perhaps the wrong questions. And perhaps our task becomes not to answer those questions as framed, but to challenge our policy colleagues to think deeper and to challenge the assumptions that lie behind the questions they have framed.
So yes, indeed, that's one challenge that we often face, the relativity of the urgency and how to defend what we consider as critical. Another challenge that we often see in some strategy deployment or impact achievement is the scalability of good ideas. You've trained thousands of researchers and leaders, how do you help people to scale their work to reach more people, but without losing the integrity and the meaning of the concept?
Yeah. So I always advise people to start small. If you start by thinking big, as is the temptation, that may be what your university wants in terms of the commercialization income. It might be what your funder wants in terms of the national or international policy impacts. There is a real risk that you put something out into the world that doesn't quite work as you intended. Instead, start small. If this is about working with national policymakers, then urge consultation, urge some kind of small-scale pilot. Do that pilot work yourself. Publish it. Demonstrate that it actually works in the real world. And only once you can demonstrate that this does actually work at the small scale, and you get the feedback about what's not working, and you iron out the problems, do you then think about how to scale. And to do that scaling work, I would start with a 3I analysis, and I would be identifying those more local groups, perhaps in my own city, that I might be able to try these ideas out with, get some feedback, do some stuff on the ground. And then I would revisit my 3I analysis to start now identifying those national colleagues, groups, maybe international groups. And the benefit now is that I have the evidence that this actually works on the ground, the proof that this is the uplift in your profit that is likely, that this is the reduction in harm that you might be able to achieve, or whatever it is. And this then makes whatever you're doing both rapidly scalable because people get it, they can see the benefits, but also responsibly or safely scalable.
And here, it requires human collaboration, of course, and trust, but not just as a marketing value, but as a practice. In your approach from your experiences, how do you build this trust, or at least ensure that you collaborate on improving the trust between people, between collaborators?
Yeah. So The 3I analysis is my first step because I now understand not only who these groups, people, organizations are, but I understand what their interests are. What is their influence, but also their limitations? How might this benefit them or harm them? And that enables me now to reach out to each of these groups in a tailored way. It's not a one-size-fits-all email that will get you a no thanks. It's not focused on me and my research. It's individually focused on, here are your needs. Here are your strategic objectives. Here are the challenges you're facing as an organization. And here's how our work might be able to help. Can we talk? And from that conversation now, which is most likely to say, yes, if you can help with that, then of course we want to talk. From that conversation, you can begin to build that trust. And for me, the second step is to help get them to help you to co-produce an impact plan. It's all very well coming up with grand ideas in your grant applications, with your colleagues in your ivory tower. It's quite another actually looking at what is needed in the real world. And the sooner you do this, the more likely you are to be able to do the kind of research that might actually meet these real felt needs on the ground. And because you're co-producing this with these organizations, your impact is their impact. They're motivated to help you with this. And so we have a very efficient and powerful approach to generating impact. I'm taking this strategic approach where I'm prioritizing the smallest number of people that I really need to reach out to. Yeah, I'll reach out to the rest if I have time. But if I'm time poor, I know I've spoken to the most important organizations. And those organizations now are working with me to achieve those impacts. And together we can achieve far, far more on far less time and resources than we could have ever achieved by ourselves.
And I would assume then, from what you say, by sharing the responsibility, right?
Exactly. So the trust building process is about co-producing, not us coming in and saying, we know best, this is what we want to see happen in the world. We ask these people, what do you want to see? What would success look like from your perspective? Together we make the plan. Together we execute that plan. We work together as equals, as colleagues, building trust as we go, as we execute that plan, as we achieve those impacts, celebrating together, sharing the success together as we go.
Yes, indeed, you're right. We should take the time to celebrate more often. Yeah. On this context, how do you stay aligned with your own values? Yeah, especially when external systems maybe push you in other directions. Is it easy for you to say no?
Yeah, I think this is a growing problem for many of us as we are increasingly extrinsically incentivized by our funders or increasingly by our governments who are assessing our impact to achieve impact for their reasons rather than for our own reasons. And what this can do is it can actually crowd out our own motives. So I may have been motivated to achieve impact prior to this, but now I'm told I have to do this. Then maybe I'm less keen on doing this, especially if I suspect that the values of those who are funding me differ from mine. My government, my university, my funder is looking for return on investment, whereas perhaps I'm seeking to tear down the corporations that are compromising the rights of the people that I am advocating for, or the environment. And actually success, as far as I would see this, would be for us to shrink the economy rather than to grow it. And it is this particular tension that I see most frequently in my work. So what I encourage people to do is to understand more clearly what your intrinsic motivations are. And I start by asking people, what do you love most about your work? Whether you're more on the teaching side, the research side, whatever it is that you do, what is it that you love? What makes you tick? What gets you out of bed? What inspires you? And once you get the answer to that, my question is, okay, so if it's creativity, if it's curiosity, if it is making a difference, well, how can impact help you do more of what you love most? And so for curiosity, creativity-driven researchers, this is about thinking about how engaging with impact could enable me to ask more interesting questions that will lead to research outputs that are more fascinating than ever before alongside the impact, about taking more creative approaches to my day-to-day work because of the challenge of trying to communicate with particular groups that are going to force me to think in really different ways, that is going to intrinsically motivate and inspire me. And I suggest to people, take your eyes off what your funders want, what your government wants, what your institution wants, and do impact because you want to on your own terms in ways that will motivate and inspire you. And impacts will start to flow and you'll love it. And the results very often is that you get impacts that your funders are not interested in, that your university or your government are not interested in. But if enough of us follow our hearts in this, then there are at least a proportion of those impacts that these people do care about. And so it's this idea of allowing 1,000 flowers to bloom. Let's bloom lots of impact all around us and create cultures in which we are doing this for the right reasons. And we'll have so much impact that the people who are looking for these more kind of extrinsic, instrumental type impacts, they'll get what they want as well. And so that's my approach to this.
Well, this is highly interesting indeed. If I could ask you 3 small but meaningful impact action, anyone could take to increase their positive impact.
Okay, so I'm going to give you 3 very simple things to do, and you've got lots more guidance on all of these on my website, fasttrackimpact.com/resources. First is to do a 3I analysis. You'll find my blog there, but you can also find our peer-reviewed journal article if you go to my homepage, profmarkreed.com, and to my publications. Once you've done your 3I analysis, create an impact plan. And so on my website, you'll see my Fast Track Impact template that will help you to start thinking through your impacts. And as I said, you co-produce that as far as possible. That template also then helps you to start thinking about the risks, what could go wrong. And so my third message is to think about the ethics, think about what could go wrong and create some contingencies. And again, on my website, you'll see a whole load of resources on the ethics of engagement and impact and our paper. Those 3 together, I would suggest, can enable you to fast track your impact responsibly.
Wonderful. Thank you. We'll put the website links in the notes of this episode. And finally, to close this in music, what do you listen when you work? What piece of music give you the energy to keep going?
So I'm a big fan of electronica music. And my favourite tune is On by Aphex Twin. And keeping with the theme, when that bass comes in, there is impact. Embarrassing. I'm almost, I just turned 50. Forget my age far too easily. So just past 50. But last summer, Aphex Twin was playing in London, and he very, very rarely plays live. And so I got tickets, but it was the end of a one-day festival, and I made the mistake of dancing all day, and my foot got rather sore. But I danced all the way through Aphex Twin's set, and by the next morning I could not walk. Year later, I eventually got over my rave injury of plantar fasciitis. But literally, I had a rave injury for a year as a result.
Oh wow, that's a dedication to Aphex Twin.
True fan.
Indeed, congratulations. All right, thanks a lot, Mark. Thank you so much for this very interesting conversation. It was a real pleasure to have you here.
It's a pleasure.
This was Almendra, Stories of Hope, Seeds of Change. If this conversation inspired you, feel free to subscribe to the podcast and share it with others, and let us know who you'd love to hear in the future episodes. You'll find all the information about Mark Reed in his work in the show notes. And if you'd like to know more about us and the idea behind Almendra, visit our website. You also find our regularly updated playlist for walking with music and meaning. Thanks for listening. Danke, gracias, merci, and see you very soon for a new episode.